What's up, guys? Do you know what's common between Batman and Marty McFly? Or how much can cost one of the most famous brand logos? Or why Nike and Asics are one and the same? Bear with me and I'll answer all these questions. The story of success for Nike started in 1957 in the University of Oregon. This is where two founders of the company first met. But there was not even an idea about Nike at that time. Adidas was everywhere. It took the whole world. Olympic champions, basketball players, world football champions, everyone weared shoes. There was no place for a new company on this market, but it's never late to change the history. And we will return to this a little bit later, but now let me introduce the founders. Bill Bowerman, a famous coach in America who trained Olympic athletes. In his youth, he wanted to become a doctor and spent a lot of time reading books by studying the structure of man. But at the age of 13, he joined a basketball team and unexpectedly realized that sports fascinate him much more than medicine, and decided to devote his whole life to it. Already in the 1934 in Portland, he started as a trainer. Due to great results of his trainees, Bill earned authority very fast, but suddenly had to stop his coaching career because of the Pearl Harbor attack. He dropped everything and joined the army. In 1945, after returning from the war, Bill received 4 bronze and 1 silver star for violent work in the army. After a couple of months of being at home, Bill Bowerman got bored. Young, but already matured former trainer, realized that he missed the sports and returned to coaching activities. As both a real sportsman and a former soldier, Bill fully focused on the result and tried not only to improve the process of training, but to change the approach in general. A special place in his thoughts was reserved by equipment. Once in the interview, Bowerman said, "Thoughts are material only if you started to do anything." Returning home from work in the evenings, he was trying to make his own first sneakers. Bill was focused on outsole, trying to find a compromise, golden mean, between quality and comfort. He was experimenting with the materials. And it could have remained just experiments, and we would never know the word Nike if not that meeting with a pale and skinny guy from Portland, studying journalism in Oregon University, who was mad to become a famous sportsman, Phil Knight. At the very childhood, Phil tried himself as a baseball player, but 3 years later, full of failures, was fired. Future billionaire was very disappointed, so returned home, threw away all the baseball equipment, and swore he's done with the sports for the whole life. Sometime later, looking at the suffering son who lost his head and knowing about ridicule on the part of classmates and former teammates, Phil's mom offered him to start something new. Running, for example. And it worked! Phil decided to test himself one more time, and being already a grown-up, famous and rich, in one of his interviews, billionaire said, "Our mothers are our first trainers." These words got in the heart of the half of Americans. But to be honest, in running he hasn't achieved outstanding results as well. By the way, running in those times wasn't even considered as a real sport. People who were running were seen as weirdos, which were just burning calories, and no one could even think that running can bring pleasure. But still, running was the right choice. There was a track team in the University of Oregon, considering one of the best in the USA, and Phil Knight became its member. He wasn't one of the best there, but still wasn't too bad. Also, Phil misses stars from the sky, he was noticed by Bowerman, and quite soon they became buddies. They both were fond of sports, and this may serve as the reason. Moreover, Phil remembered that Bill reminded him of his father. As his father, Coach was a careless, sparse with praise, demanding, but at the same time humble man. Bill taught young Phil not only sports, but also not to get stuck in the result, polish his skills, and never give up. As a result, taking prizes, Phil always appreciated his trainer. But time was running. Phil Knight graduated from the university, went to Stanford, and defended his thesis on the topic Prospects for the Development of Production in Japan. Bill Bowerman continued working as a trainer and tried to enhance everything around him. Though they parted ways, they still stayed in contact. Phil perceived Bill as a teacher and father. Bill also had father feelings. Maybe that's what will help them to build empire in future. Bill Bowerman didn't tell anyone about his experiments with the shoes in his garage, because he was afraid of being ridiculed. No one except Phil. I believe this fact can help you to understand their relationships better. At the age of 24, Phil Knight had to admit, the dream to become a world-known athlete was dead. Despite all his trainings and perseverance, he just hadn't got the level needed. And now he felt lost. He didn't know what to do with his life. One day, Phil finally decided he couldn't just keep waiting for some random opportunity, and he had to create this opportunity himself. So Phil decided to go traveling around the world. He figured as a part of the trip he would visit Japan to see if it's possible to bring Japanese shoes to the American market. Phil had a crazy idea to import Japanese shoes into American market and to replace German shoes. Why crazy? I remind you that Adidas has a very strong hold on the market. And more important, Phil Knight didn't know anyone in Japan to reach out to. He knew absolutely nothing about imported shoes or how to sell them in America. He didn't have any plan of money. He didn't have money even for the journey. He asked his father to borrow him it. Father wasn't happy with Phil's idea about traveling, but still gave him money. Young Phil found one of his friends who agreed to join him, and they started their journey. During the trip, Phil and his friend visited Hawaii and stayed there for some time. They even got jobs, selling encyclopedias door to door, just to allow themselves to stay here a little bit longer. However, Phil was pretty shy to do the job well, and after a while he decided it's time to move forward. Phil's friend found a girl and decided to stay, so they parted ways. It was time to go to Japan, the place which Phil wanted to visit from the very beginning. In Japan, Phil came across one particular running shoe that caught his eye. The shoes were manufactured by the company Onitsuka. Brand was called Tiger. By the way, now it's ASICS. Phil liked not only the design, these shoes had high quality and were quite cheap, two main criteria he needed. Phil liked these shoes so much that called to the managers of the brand and managed to arrange a meeting. Before going, he bought a copy of How to Do Business with Japanese and tried to memorize as much information as he could. At the meeting, Knight introduced himself as American shoe distributor, who wanted to import Japanese shoes to America. Phil knew lots of facts and statistics about American shoe market from his assignment at the university, so it looked like he knew he was talking about. Onitsuka wanted to sell their shoes in America as well. Perhaps that's why it was quite easy for Phil to impress Japanese managers. However, one of the managers asked, "What's the name of the company you are from?" Phil wasn't ready for that question at all, because he didn't even think he could go so far. He felt absolutely out of his depths and wanted to be back at home with his parents. But suddenly, he remembered blue ribbons in his room he received as a reward for running. "Gentlemen, I represent Blue Ribbon Sports of Portland, Oregon," after a second answered future billionaire. He also added that market had been dominated by Adidas, but they were too expensive, and if Onitsuka would be able to come with lower prices, they would become billionaires. Then he asked them to ship over some samples to his address in America. It was a tremendous success. Phil returned to Oregon so excited and optimistic, because it seemed like his idea was about to become a reality. But months after months, no shoe samples arrived. Only 4 months later, Phil received his 12th pair of brand new shoes. As soon as he got them, he went to show the shoes to his old friend Bowerman and see what he thought. Coach was so impressed with the shoes that offered to be Phil's business partner. So, they agreed to be co-founders of the new company, Blue Ribbon Sports. They invested $500 each and offered 300 pairs of shoes from Japan. Phil also wrote a letter to Onitsuka, asking if Blue Ribbon Sports can be the exclusive distributor of Tiger shoes in the western United States. They agreed, and already in April 1964, 300 pairs of shoes arrived from Japan to the USA. As soon as the shoes arrived, Knight started to offer them to different sporting goods stores, but no one took it seriously. Moreover, they said they had no need for another track shoes. So Phil realized he had to sell these shoes himself. His first store was the track of his car. It's difficult to believe, but that's how the first Nike shoes were sold. He also showed the shoes to all athletes, coaches and fans at the running track. 3 months later, he managed to sell out all 300 pairs. Tigers were better and cheaper than the alternatives, and that made people want to buy them. By the end of the first year, Blue Ribbon Sports sold $8,000 worth of shoes. And all the money Knight had, he invested in new pairs of shoes, leaving just a little bit for food. Shortly later, Phil Knight recruited several sales, mostly ex-runners who shared the vision of the company. The first full-time employer was Jeff Johnson, a former runner whom Phil knew from the competitions. He was responsible for visiting different competitions, talking to the sportsmen, selling them Blue Ribbon shoes and asking for feedback. In 1966, Blue Ribbon Sports opened their first retail store. They designed the store as a sanctuary for runners. There were shelves full of books related to running. It was a place where runners could hang out and talk. And while Jeff Johnson was busy with sales, Bill Bowerman was responsible for innovations. Once a shipment arrived from Japan, Bowerman took a few shoes and ripped them apart to see how they were designed. He made notes on how to improve the shoes and sent them to Onitsuka factory, asking for changes to be made before the next shipping. By the way, do you know how Nike waffle was invented? Bill Bowerman was having breakfast and suddenly noticed a waffle iron, which his wife used for cooking. At the same day, Bill took that waffle iron, for what he was punished a little bit later by his wife, leather and latex, went to the garage and created the first prototype of Nike waffle. Yeah, just like that. At the same time, Bowerman started coaching popular runners and future Olympians, helping to build their brand and selling more. Everything was going well, and Phil decided to ask Onitsuka if his company could be the exclusive distributor of Tigers across all of America, not only the West as it was before. But suddenly, they said no. They said the main reason was that Blue Ribbon Sports was not big and stable enough. However, Phil Knight was able to convince Japanese to strike the deal to be the exclusive US partner for the Tiger brand shoes. In 1969, Blue Ribbon Sports consists of 20 employees and several stores. And if previously company was just selling Tiger shoes, now it started to order its own sneakers. The first success model was Nike Cortez. They were produced at the same factory in Japan, but exclusively for Blue Ribbon. These sneakers just blew up the market. They became the highest-selling shoes in 1969. Business was booming. But with a great success, the first serious issues came. I have to mention that Onitsuka's initial refusal was just a tip of the iceberg. As it has been already said, Nike Cortez were pretty much popular, and quite often they were selling out faster than they could keep up with. So, Phil was repeatedly asking Japanese to send the shoes faster to meet the demand, but Onitsuka was sending them at the same pace. You already know that Bowerman sent his notes with suggestions and innovations to the manufacturer, but Japanese were slow with the implementation and sometimes even completely ignored them. To solve accumulated issues, Phil arranged another in-person meeting with a representative from Onitsuka. The meeting was strange. Japanese were not satisfied with the sales, despite ever-increasing volumes. Something was definitely wrong. While the representative of Japanese left the room, Phil found some documents and found out that Onitsuka decided to replace Blue Ribbon with another distributor. He was outraged and hurt, but after a while, Phil got over the shock and decided to strike back. Knight and Bowerman saw this situation not as the end of the world, but as an opportunity. Now they could be not just a distributor, but a manufacturer. After all, the Cortez, Onitsuka best-selling shoes, were created by Bowerman. Moreover, they wouldn't have to keep waiting for shipment to arrive. They could do as many shoes as they needed and implement any innovations they want. But first, they needed a new name. Do you remember Jeff Johnson, their first full-time employer? He was that who came up with the present name of the company. Once he had a dream where he saw a beautiful young woman in white. She introduced herself as Nika, a winged goddess of victory. Jeff told this story to the colleagues, offered to rename the company and create a new memorable logo. Phil wasn't keen on the name Nike, but they were running out of time and had to decide right now. So he agreed. Next they needed was a logo. Bill invited one of his students, Carolyn Davidson. There were dozens of options, but founders stopped on the swoosh. Logo which symbolized moving forward, and wings displayed on the statue of the goddess Nika. Phil didn't like it as well, but promised to get used to it. By the way, for this work Carolyn got only $35. Of course, later, when the company became famous with millions of dollars in revenue, the founders valued Carolyn and gave her stock in the company and a branded gold diamond ring. They already had the designs they wanted to use, a new version of popular Cortez, so it wasn't a problem. But they had to find a new manufacturer where they could produce high-quality shoes at an affordable price. Unfortunately, all the manufacturers they tested had quality control issues. However, they managed to find right manufacturers. Right, not just one, but several. Phil corrected the mistake he had done with Onitsuka. So rather than committed to just one manufacturer, he established a network of manufacturers. Speaking of Onitsuka, there were several trials, but in the end both parties eventually settled and went their separate ways. It was 1971, when Nike we know was born. This year the company crossed $1 million in sales per year. In 1976, Nike managed to shock the whole world when during the Olympics most of the athletes wore its shoes. They were not too popular in America, not to mention Europe, where all were crazy about Adidas. In the several next years, Nike's revenue rose rapidly. 14 millions in 1976, then doubled in just 1 year, 28 millions in 1977. Phil continued to reinvest everything in more growth, and it was working. Things were going great. Sales grew. Brand became more and more recognizable. Legal disputes were behind. They were ordering more and more shoes, opening more and more stores, and hiring more and more employers. But one morning he received a letter. It was a bill from US Customs Service, where was said Nike owed $25 million of taxes. First Phil thought it was just a joke or mistake, but it wasn't. The bill was completely legal. Except Nike, there were other companies selling shoes, Keds, Converse, and a few other smaller factories. They all were scared of Nike's popularity and growth. They considered Nike could shoot them out of the market. So they sent representatives to Washington to lobby something called American Selling Price. It was a rule that said if there is a shoe manufactured by a company in the US, then anyone importing a similar shoe from abroad must pay an import duty of 20% of the competitor's selling price. It was an old rule from the times before the Great Depression, and Nike's competitors wanted to enforce it. If you didn't understand anything, don't panic. Now I'll try to explain on the fingers. Nike wasn't manufacturing their shoes in the US, but abroad. The only thing their competitors need to do, produce a copy of Nike in the US and make it extremely expensive. And even though Nike's shoes were original, they were produced abroad and imported to the US from another country. So they had to pay these import fees. To make matters much worse, the import duties were backdated 3 years on every pair of shoes Nike had imported. There was no way Nike could pay that much. It would bankrupt them. So Phil found one of the best lawyers he could find, produced a TV commercial telling their story and explaining what had happened. And after 3 brutal years of fighting with the customs office, they finally reached a settlement of $9 million. It was still unfair, but in those 3 years Nike had grown tremendously, and their sales reached $440 million. So now they could afford to settle and put the whole thing behind them. In 1979, Nike received a letter from an aeronautical engineer, Frank Rudy, who offered to use an inner gas encapsulated in a plastic bag as a caution system. The 1979 became a year of Nike's famous technology, Nike Air. By 1980, Nike running sneakers became the most recognizable and best-selling sneakers in the USA and Canada, overtaking Adidas. At the same year, Nike started their sportswear line. That helped them not only to make more money, but gave them an advantage during negotiation endorsement deals with athletes, as they could offer them more than just shoes. Do you remember Bowersman's main goal? Right, to help athletes overcome themselves and set new records. Thanks to this strategy, in 1984, Nike was able to sign the most successful contract with Michael Jordan at the very beginning of his career. But it wasn't easy. Jordan didn't want to sign the contract. To make Jordan change his mind, Sonny Vaccaro, Nike's chief negotiator at that time, said that thanks to Nike, Jordan would become a brand himself, and promised there would be the sneakers named after him. It was unbelievable and sounded super weird at the time, but still Jordan agreed. Nike trusted Jordan and working together created a new brand line, Jordan. The first product released under this brand were sneakers specially developed for the athlete and named after him, Jordan Air. These shoes made a splash even before the start of sales. People were standing in the queues for several days to be one of the first who bought it. And the reason for that were the fines from NBA. The fact was that the sneakers were red and black, while all other basketball players wore white sneakers. So NBA fined Michael for $1,000 every time he wore those shoes. But despite everything, he continued to wear it, and Nike paid all his fines, attracting more and more attention to the sneakers. By the way, Converse were the leaders among basketball players at that time, but Jordan's era changed everything. Already by 1986, Nike had overtaken Converse. After Air Jordan 1 were Air Jordan 2 and the most popular Air Jordan 3. They were designed by Tinker Hatfield. He modified the nose of the sneakers, made them easier, and added leather, resembling the ivory texture. Tinker Hatfield, also known as a designer who had a hand in creating Batman shoes and Nike Mag, worn by Marty McFly. Nike was the first to decide that the subject of advertisement should not be the product itself, but the one who wears it. There was even a ridiculous case. During the awards ceremony for the US basketball team at the Olympics 1992, practically all the members of the team tried to hide Reebok logo because they had contract with Nike. Next year, Sporting News announced Phil Knight as the most powerful person in sports. This was the first time when a non-athlete had received this award. In 1999, in the age of 88, one of the founders, Bill Bowerman, died. But he immortalized himself in the history of Nike. And in 2000, in his honor, Nike released a special sneakers, which suit people with different shape of the foot. Phil Knight was at the helm till 2004 and handed over the reins to William Paris, but retained the position of chairman of the board till 2016. Since 2001, Nike was been promoting sports. It became Nike's main strategy. In cooperation with Apple, Nike released sneakers tracking activity, promoted their health service Nike Plus, and introduced smartwatches to the world. Practically every year, Nike performed different competitions to widespread healthy lifestyle. Company tries to use in the production organic products or materials which can be reused. For example, in 2010, Nike released football sportswear produced from the reused plastic. Nowadays, Nike is a global corporation, broaden its assortment every month. As of the end of 2022, Nike has a market cap of more than $180 billion. Maybe you remember that in their first year Blue Ribbon Sports sold $8,000 worth of shoes. Today, Nike generates $8,000 in sales every 6 seconds. Development of raw materials, quality control, professionals on every step of production, and stunning volume of sales. All this is modern Nike. There is only one question left. Do you still think your crazy idea is so crazy? If Phil Knight managed, why shouldn't you try? Just do it.